Willkommen or bienvenue. Welcome once again to Modern Sales Meltdown with David Chernick and myself, Gareth Wax, the man of many hats. And what we're talking about today is, as usual, to do with sales. And hopefully, if you take it on board or you listen through it, you may find something within it to strike a chord and maybe even change your own process.
You will.
So what is today's topic, David?
It's a no-brainer.
No. What is today's topic? Oh, sorry. Yes.
It's a no-brainer.
So
sure, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, sure,
it's a no-brainer.
All right. I mean, so what do we mean by this?
Some things apparently sell themselves. Okay. I hear this in different ways. So one of the ways I heard it fairly recently was somebody they're hiring. So they're hiring a couple of more salespeople, and they don't need those salespeople to be so sophisticated because the product that they're selling is a no-brainer. However, they've struggled to sell it in the past. So why do you struggle to sell something that's a no-brainer? And I kind of came to the conclusion that I don't know, I haven't thought about this before, but with this situation, it made me come to the conclusion that when you have a product that should be able to sell itself, we kind of like forget every other sales discipline. Yes. Which means that we're not even doing simple things like qualification. We're not doing things like listening. We're not doing things like following an actual sales methodology. And dare I say it, we're barely even closing. So products don't just sell themselves. I mean, there are certain things which are like commodities or necessities. Food, I suppose you could say, sells itself. However,
the classic example is printer cartridges, isn't it?
Printer cartridges, yeah, but even they don't really sell themselves. I mean, people switch providers, and there's different ways of buying that stuff. But yeah, I mean,
I think what they mean is the idea of them are pre-sold. So you have a printer, at some point you will need a printer cartridge. But the thing is, you still. First of all, there's one thing I want to draw your attention to. When I was much younger, I remember I was giving out free samples for a company. I can't remember. I was standing there on the station concourse, giving away free samples from a trade. And I remember at the time watching another person doing it as well. We were spread apart by a good 150 yards or so. And he would just stand there and people would walk by him and ignore it. It was stuff that people wanted. I think it was Diet Coke, little tiny cans of Diet Coke.
Oh, they're best in the tiny cans.
Right. And I started thinking, well, hang on a moment. Why isn't everybody just grabbing his Diet Coke? So I started saying, free, delicious Diet Coke here. Why don't you get some? And of course, I got mobbed. Now, the point is, there's a basic sales discipline here, which is you have to draw people's attention to the fact you exist. And also, you've got to make sure that you convince them that what you're doing is good for them. Because often, especially in this modern cynical world, people assume that there's a catch.
Yeah. I mean, there's a whole load of stuff in there. I think things that are supposed to be able to sell themselves are supposed to be obvious value propositions. That all you have to do is to tell them what it is, and they'll be bought into that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, whether it's a catch or whether there's no close or whatever is the reason why you're not selling the thing that is supposed to be a no-brainer, your amazing product, is that it just isn't true that people do need coaching to be able to buy things. And yes, at the outset, being able to grab people's attention. I mean, I consider that really sort of more of a marketing thing, but they still need to be marketed. You still need to be able to educate people that they are there. And yes, it might be that the value is obvious to you, but people have brains that need to be able to process the fact that that value might be obvious to you, but also is relevant to them. And people make all sorts of decisions in various different ways.
Right.
So that is why sales methodologies exist, so that you can have a repeatable and scalable process for onboarding new clients.
But it's very rare. It's very rare that the product communicates its value just by existing.
Yeah.
And not only that, but it's very rare that someone will go through the entire sales journey from having decided they want one of those to seeing your product and realizing its value to actually closing. You still need to, as you say, coach them through it.
Right. So this is how the conversation started. But then I realized that the phrase "it's a no-brainer" seems to appear in sales teams all the way through their sales process. So, you could be writing a detailed proposal, and there'll be parts of it that we just fail to explain properly because it's supposedly a no-brainer.
So it's very assumptive. It's an assumptive process because you're assuming that people will just catch the subtext, right?
Yeah, I think so. The value is obvious, and that the value is overwhelming. So those things I don't think we can ever presume. As you said earlier on, you said before, there's so many distractions, so much going on in the world. People's brains work in all sorts of different ways. Some people don't have a brain that can pick up on things like nuance or turns of phrase or metaphors or something. We need to be able to describe things in the way that is appropriate for that particular buyer. If you're doing it bespoke for each individual buyer, then that is cool. If you have the sort of service where you're able to do that, high ticket items, it means you can mold your proposition depending on who the buyer is, their preferences, what's important to them, what keeps them up at night. If it is a product that you are sort of mass selling and you don't have the luxury of being able to personalize every single proposal at the moment, we'll come on to it in a second, then you just need to make sure that you're catering for it for everybody and spelling it out in simple terms. It may well be obvious to you. It may well be obvious to your biggest fans and most loyal customers. However, spell it out in simple language, short sentences. Do all of the things that we've been talking about for the last couple of years, and particularly in terms of the qualification.
Do you know what? There's an irony here, because the big thing on LinkedIn at the moment is the move away from mystery to obvious. And what I mean by that is, instead of referring to things by inference now, because people spend so little time, because of the rise of the mobile phone, because most people view LinkedIn in the same way as they do Tinder in so many ways, they're quite ready to swipe away. You've got to make it so it's obvious what your value is quickly. You can't sit around making vague references or putting up phrases that lead. Those days are gone. Those very 90s behavior. Nowadays, you've got to be fairly blunt and direct. And,
that's interesting.
And that means that if you think that your value, your product or your service or your idea is a no-brainer, you've got to assume that nobody else will see it. You've got to make it obvious to you. And the same goes with sales in general. You've got to make it ever sure that each of the steps are plain. I would even say that right at the beginning of the sales process, you should lay it out to the client. This is what we're going to be doing, and then this bit will come, and then that bit, and that will be the close over there. Almost lay it out.
Yeah. So the discipline is to stick to your process, regardless of how obvious you think it might be. And that starts with qualification. So, if you are selling a service, then quite often your qualification is going to involve the question, if you were to become a client of this no-brainer, when do you think that might be? Yeah. Just because something is a no-brainer and they might get it straight away, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're in the market for it there and then when you think they need it. There's all sorts of different life cycles. There's all different stuff that be going on in their life as well. So, we do want to be qualifying. We also need to be qualifying on things like budget and price. And the qualitative elements, what exactly is this thing that is the no-brainer? Be able to, as you just pointed out, spell it out in simple terms, human terms, get cut straight to the chase. Where is the value? and tell people what it is. So, you know, if they're able to qualify and go, okay, fine, all right. If I was to buy this product, yeah, I'd buy it straight away, or, you know, when it's appropriate. It seems, yes, that's the sort of price that I'd probably pay for that kind of thing. And yeah, that is the sort of thing that I can see helping me in my life, right? You've qualified it. You can then move on to your close. There's nothing wrong with doing that. You don't need to go through the whole rigmarole as most salespeople do of methodology. Once you've qualified, you are in a position where you could close. Okay, yes, there may be some other details in there, but don't have to dwell on it, especially if it is something where the value is obvious. However, you do need to get to a close. And if they are in any way distracted from that close, then yes, we need to be figuring out, well, what is the problem that this thing solves, and being able to get them to articulate that in their own language.
You know, you missed a bit of the qualification, the most important part.
I had 3, didn't I?
Yeah, there's a bit that you usually say. I don't know if you call it the qualification. You usually say, if you were going to buy this, when would you buy it? And to,
I think I did do that.
Did you?
Did I miss it? Yeah. If you were to become a client, when do you think it would be?
Exactly. And then if you've got that plus all the other parts, you are now in a position, if you wanted to close, because you know all the parameters that guide that.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I think there's also, I was going to say, plain English, no buzzwords. This is the biggest problem I keep coming across at the moment, is people want to describe their simple product, their obvious product, their no-brainer product or service, but they use industry terms that maybe not their entire audience know.
Yeah, there is a lot of that. Too clever by half, isn't there?
Yes, way too clever. And it's like, well, the last thing you want to do is make your potential client feel dumb, or make them feel like they should know this thing when they don't.
Well, that used to be a closing technique, which thankfully disappeared quite a long time ago. But it did actually used to work, that you could baffle people, and they think, well, I better go ahead with this because it sounds like, or you can guilt people into closing. I mean, there was a lot of that, and there was a lot of when people with objection handling, people looking at you, like the sellers looking at you like you're crazy. What? It's too expensive. What are you talking about? But that doesn't wash anymore, thankfully. But yeah, so going through that sales process and being able to articulate it clearly, being able to understand the value clearly, and you're especially, I think, prone to be cutting corners when you do have a product where the value is so obvious to you that it really is a no-brainer. Those are the ones that get neglected, in my experience.
Because there's an assumption there that if you've got any gaps in the information you're providing, that the client or potential client will fill them in for you. And I think that's dangerous, very dangerous behavior, because the assumption is that they've got all the information they need to make the sales.
Yeah.
Whereas half the time they may be missing a very crucial bit because you just didn't bother making it clear, because you assumed they'd pick it up.
For sure. And I think actually perhaps just from what you just said then, is that if you do have a product where the value is not obvious, so the opposite of a no-brainer, it still has value, but it's not a no-brainer, it needs some thought and analysis. You probably would have gone through a more in-depth thought process when learning how to articulate the value. So you would have put more effort into it. The problem is with products that, that should be a shoo-in, is that we don't have that discipline. We're not thinking about it. And I would advise people that are selling things that they feel really is a no-brainer that will sell itself, is to run it by people that are in their immediate circle, people that are good communicators. So if you've got a good copywriter, mate, if you've got somebody that's in marketing, if you've got someone that's in even like sales automation, anything like that, run it by them, ask them to tell you what they perceive the value to be. You might be surprised, you might see them scratching their heads and wondering, how is this particular thing so valuable? Okay. And you've got to be careful in those situations whenever anybody does question the value to not look at them like they're an idiot that doesn't get it. Yeah, that's a method that used to be a closing method, but these days will put people off. You know, there's so much distrust.
Quite rightly, I think it's a terrible closing method, but I know people. I've met people who try to use that on me. You know, almost laughing at me. You don't understand what that means.
Yeah, it was very prevalent in especially things like financial services, which is probably one reason why they're so regulated now.
Yeah,
and we still have financial services salespeople, some of those old dinosaurs that sell that way. And you know, one of the things I hear them say a lot, I've probably mentioned it on this show before, is it's not like the old days, we're not allowed to sell anymore. To which I always reply, you are allowed to sell, you're just not allowed to lie. But
that's
if you're in an industry where regulation was hoisted on you, then you know you probably should recognize that your products are prone to being missold. Okay, so there is the indicator for you to get it as simple as possible and to really cut to the chase, understand really what the value is, and be able to articulate that clearly, and not just articulate it, but be able to link it back to the features of that product. This is why this product delivers that value, because if they don't understand it, they probably are going to be wary about buying it.
Well, the other thing is, if they don't understand it, and once they've bought it, that sale might fall out as quickly as it fell in, because all it takes is a couple of people within their team to sit around and say, "It's an intervention, mate. You bought this product, and really, there's no real use for it. Do you think you can get a refund?" That's the worst possible situation.
That's a horrible thing to happen, isn't it?
Yeah, it's happened to me once.
Something and everybody asked you for it. What, you bought that crazy shit?
Yeah. Why do you buy that for then? We don't need that. We certainly don't need that now.
Yeah.
You know.
So the bottom line is, if you have a product that is a no-brainer, watch out. Yeah, because you might think it's a no-brainer. You might even think that you've been selling it successfully. Chances are, though, you are radically underperforming your potential, unless you are spelling out the value in very, very simple direct terms, connecting those value propositions to the features that are inherent in the product.
My recommendation is, if you want to find more information about those kind of sales methodologies, please contact David Chernick, Treacle, Treacl. If you type that into either Google or better still LinkedIn, he'll pop up like the original Bad Penny, and then you can approach him, and I'm certain he'll give you a little bit of advice to get on with, but more importantly, you can have a discussion about what your pain points are, and so we can come up with an adequate solution. Until next time, thank you for watching. Keep your feet on the ground, keep reaching for the stars, and please look after your mental health. Bye-bye now. You know the music's coming.
Ciao, ciao.